Great. Thanks, Nicholas, for taking our time today. I think it was great connecting last week. Really loved our conversation and thought it would be great to have your insights about this industry and talk a little more on few topics that we find it very fascinating. Before we jump into the specific topics of it, it would be great if you would just kick it off with an introduction about you and what you're really passionate about this industry.
Cool. It was a pleasure speaking to you last week as well. My name is Nicholas Lopez Junior. My mission is basically to bring out the best in humans. And my, let's say, titles would be a wellness advisor. And I have certifications and specialties around movement science and basically sports nutrition. But I always use my mission as a guiding light because technically whatever information helps bring out the best in humans is relevant to me, to my projects, to my delivery process, and throughout my entire journey, I'm in an industry for about 10 years, and I've done the 10,000 hours of client one-on-ones. You could kind of consider it that way. And throughout that journey, I've been at major big box gyms here in New York City. So all the big box gyms that you've heard about, I've probably been there, and I've been a master trainer at New York Sports Club, and I broke a sales record at Equinox. And the reason I mention that is just to let you know I've gone the traditional route, and I wasn't really satisfied with some of the progressive steps of what happens once you get to a high level of achievement in that space. So I went to business school halfway through my personal training career. And throughout business school, everybody was like, "Are you changing careers?" And I was like, "No." I wanted to study the wellness industry from the lens of quote unquote business school, and basically graduated through COVID and the very beginning of COVID, and basically was tasked to apply everything I learned right away, right? Business knowledge plus the entire macro environment shifting. You can no longer train in person. People are really thinking about their health. And basically now I want to meet people who are helping contribute to the next generation of fitness and wellness. And thank you for having me on.
It's great to hear. Thanks for introducing yourself. And it looks like you've covered different aspects of the fitness industry throughout your journey of being there. I know you also run this brand of Peak Vitality. Would love to know what is it about? I know you're very passionate about this space, but would love to understand the mission behind it. If you could share a few thoughts, that'd be great.
Sure. So my company, Peak Vitality Solutions, I'm a co-founder. My co-founder is Rahul Aluri Junior, and we basically started the company at the beginning of COVID. And fundamentally, the mission there is to help awaken people's inner power to thrive. Especially, you can imagine that type of climate in the health crisis of that moment. It's important to think about what you can control and think about what you can't control. And fundamentally, you can think as, the acronym for the company is PVS. You can think as PVS just helping identify what's the most important thing to control right now. And that's all the client has to worry about. If they're interested in learning more, that's where we kind of talk about all the exercise sciences. But behind the scenes of that, there's a lot that goes into the process of making recommendations, because we have to consider safety. We have to consider how much education this particular client wants. And there's all these other things that you would say is one of the strongest attributes at PVS, which is our recommendation system. And then on top of that, the results that come from that, right? So that's the application, right? So there's two kind of core things that we really focus at PVS, which is how do we make recommendations? And then how do we make the implementation, the application of that, so they can actually generate the results? And we feel that we do that at the highest level possible, and definitely want to see more people operating at that level.
And that very much aligns with your thing of expanding human potential. So very good to hear the mission behind it. I think there are three broad topics where we'd love to get your insights on. One is in generally talking about the whole industry as such. the wellness industry particularly, then we'll go deeper into how does client engagement and retention happen so that some of the coaches who listen to this could benefit from it. And lastly, we'll go deeper into the future of AI and technology in this industry and how the potential it has, which is, I think, the most exciting topic both of us are very much looking forward to. So I think to begin with, one thing, for a decade experience in this, what are some of the biggest shifts you've seen, particularly in the wellness industry for your journey of being here?
That's an interesting question. That's something that me and my partner speak about all the time in terms of like identifying the cycles of any industry you operate in. Because you also have to identify the cycles of like the economy and business cycles and all these other type of cycles. Just for context, Robert Greene, in his book Human Nature, or The Laws of Human Nature, really speaks to what I'm mentioning in terms of quote unquote, what are the cycles in which humans and civilizations operate on. And we have to, or I guess anybody in the wellness industry should kind of consider how do humans change, because fundamentally we're in the business of change, right? We want to create positive change or adaptation. So that's just a side note there. And specifically to the industry, I want to phrase this carefully, but I would say if you think about like the 60s and 70s, that's where I think I have the time right. When was pumping iron? When was Arnold pumping iron? Like, when did that come out? Let me see. Arnold pumping iron. Okay, 1977. Okay, so I was right. 1977. So pumping iron basically introduced bodybuilding to the masses, right, to the zeitgeist. And basically every gym from there started having more and more bodybuilding equipment. And that kind of sparks curiosity in the general population. So that was one shift. I think prior to that was more about Olympic weightlifting, potentially more of maybe Soviet type of training practices. So kind of made bodybuilding go mainstream. Matter of fact, before Arnold was a bodybuilder, he was a powerlifter, right? So that's the type of training it was more, I think, Soviet and Olympics sport kind of specific popularity. So there was a shift there from like the Olympic sports to like bodybuilding becoming more mainstream, specifically for men. And then from that shift, I would say you then got into like the aerobics, like the P90Xs, the what was it called? I've done this before. It's basically those like live recorded workout classes that people would buy DVDs for, like after that bodybuilding era. I think it was probably late 90s, early 2000s, you would have that type of vibe. And then you start to see the emergence of the CrossFit kind of landscape. Now, as these kind of, I guess it's important to context for the audience, like these are shifts that are happening from the general population zeitgeist. Olympics have been around for hundreds of like years. So like that is always in its own lane. But in terms of what type of shifts we're talking about, I would say how does the general consumer, general population really context with what fitness means and what wellness means. So I'd say that after that, it was like the CrossFit type of group classes, boot camps. And then we're in this kind of age where it's the shift now into the influencer, right? Into the fitness enthusiast. Now the barriers to entry have changed, where you may not need as many certifications or traditional education, having a mentor for 2 years and doing thousands of sessions one-on-one. Now, because of social media and that digital age, now we have this era of quote unquote fitness enthusiasts who have made a personal brand by delivering fitness to their audience. And so I would say those are the kind of general shifts of how people interface with fitness. Now, most people are looking for kind of the influencer to help guide with their fitness advice. And again, I'm talking about general population. So maybe awareness of how to interface with fitness and wellness is very beginner.
That's a great walk down the memory lane. I think we discovered different decades of fitness. And I think that there's a lot of evolving and also a lot of um, trends. Like there's just burst of different fitness categories that just come up and then some die down, some stay around. How do you help your clients understand or process this information a lot better? Because, like you said, this is the era of fitness influencers, and the barrier to entry is extremely low. And lot of times people have this information of, oh, I'm missing out by not doing it. Probably I need to do different formats, and maybe that's going to help me do better at whatever I'm doing. So how do you tackle this thing of helping your clients understand, okay, what is a marketing hype versus what are these genuine wellness practices that are going to help you in the long run?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Look, that question, I'm a highly curious person. I think whoever says they have humans figured all the way out, please introduce me to them so we can like have a lot of questions to ask. But I feel like it's a mastery, so mastery never ends, right? And that question led me to kind of frame the concept of wellness advisor, because I actually came up working with a lot of financial advisors, and they help kind of manage risk. And I did think about that. You know, some industries have a working definition across the entire industry of what risk is and how to what type of reward to expect for the level of risk you take. And in the fitness and wellness industry, it's a little bit different. That's not really there. So some of these like frameworks that exist in other advising industries are not really present in the fitness and wellness industry. So that question that you asked is a really relevant question. And how I do that specifically is by generating assessments. You know, my partner kind of really reminded me early on when I was working with him one-on-one that like it's not only about getting the most advanced education and certification, but you have to really extract like how that assessment was built and then make sure you apply the right programming after that. And specifically for, you know, how to help people navigate any type of information, what I've learned is you have to ask them 4 things. And this is the assessments I require any of the clients I take on in a wellness partnership to fulfill. The first thing you have to ask them is like the general, in the fitness space, it's called PAR-Q, physical activity readiness questionnaire. So there's like all these safety considerations, what's your blood pressure? Like you need that. That's like safety first, right? So you need that. And there's a lot of versions on how to do that. We have our own way, but you have to ask them who they are. Who are you? And then you have to ask them, what are your priorities right now? What are your priorities right now? You have to understand that before you try to help them discern information, because you have to try to get as much empathy, what I call deep empathy versus shallow empathy, to try to create as much deep empathy as possible, to really understand how they're interfacing with the information that they're coming across, and also the level of reaction they're having to that information. So that second piece is like, what are your priorities? And I can go deeper into any of these 4 pieces, but I'm going to keep it really topical. That second piece is, what are your priorities? Are you, for example, in a existential state? Are you having like midlife crisis? Are you having a whole identity change? And this can happen at any age. Are you dealing with a huge health crisis? Are you like anything that's like core? Is that where you're at right now? It's also like experiential. Are your priorities just to have great experiences? It's also socio-cultural. Are your priorities to take the investments you make into yourself from wellness into socio-cultural benefits, like getting a promotion at work or helping organize some type of family or cultural event? And then lastly is elite. Are you looking to be an elite athlete or an elite at your age class? So that, again, the first part is, who are you? Second part is, what are your priorities? Third is, what are the resources you have available now? Time, energy, money. And then the last one are, what are your goals? So in order to help people navigate information, you in summary, you have to give them good assessments. for themselves to kind of be self-aware of like, okay, who am I? What are my priorities? What are my resources I have available now? And what are my goals? I think if you help them with what I found is when you help people create language, inner dialogue with themselves by asking them those questions, they can better grasp and digest and process all the information that's out there. So again, going back to that first statement, control what you can control.
Great. I do have a slightly tangential question to this, but very relevant to how you typically advise clients. So let's say you have all this information about your client, but going a step further into, let's say they get started on a new exercise or a program, wellness program with you. What are some of those three elements that you would advise your clients to prioritize on so that they can make the best of the new routine they're starting with you?
So are you talking about specifically about exercise?
It could be anything. Let's say exercise to some clients, or sticking to a diet plan to someone. Or to keep it simple, maybe we'll just focus on exercise program. What are some of the three tips or suggestions or advice you would give to them to make sure that they make the best of the routine that you designed for them?
Okay, make the best routine possible. Is this without that information or with that information?
I think with all the information that you have about them, I think so. Often, there's just some context on why I'm asking you this is that it's very hard for people to stick to something and follow for a long time. I mean, it's a lot of things can happen, right? Motivation drops, other priorities. It's not that people are not disciplined. There's a lot of other things also that happen in life which might take a toll on them. So, for someone to be show a lot more compliance to any routine that you give them, what are some of the advices that you share typically? 2, 3 that you would usually tell them so that they may and at least follow till the end of the program.
Yeah. Well, okay, assuming we have that information, then let's say exercise is a big priority, or their goals require exercise. So number one is have an assessment. And there's a lot out there. So again, this goes back to like the importance of assessments. I don't want to reiterate that enough. Or I can't like say that enough, but there's a lot of exercise assessments out there. We have our own movement assessment. You can check the website out under what's called restorative human movement screen, but there's a lot of other screens. Something important to note is that we're not dogmatic with any one method. So if there's a better method out there to do movement screening, and movement screening basically checks where is the individual at? How are they moving? What's their potential for injury? Are they extremely tight in there? Like, where's their connection with their body at? So trying to understand where is this person's connection with their body at? That's first. So I would say do any type of assessment, even if it's like a squat, like how deep can you squat? Or, and there's so many samples. It's like, you have to keep it human as well. You can maybe show them a list of like 10 assessments, and whichever one they would find most fun or enjoyable, that's important. And so I guess that's the second tip, or maybe the first tip, which is make it fun. Even elite athletes, they have fun with the extreme amount of discipline that's required. They basically help tame their demons through sport. Everybody has to tame their demons. Okay, we're all humans. It's just the Jungian kind of the shadow self. So the first tip I say, if I were like zoom out a little bit more, is like think about, understand what aspects of what you offer they have the most fun or interest in, intellectually or like just fun part. That's sometimes so surprising because we can focus on delivering like the highest level results, but then they have fun in a completely separate way. So figure out what fun and enjoyment means to that individual. 2, run them through an assessment. And then 3, make sure you have a plan for when anything comes up. So if they go on travel, if they have a really stressful week, no sleep, they were working on code or building something all night long and they didn't get any sleep, but they can't miss too many workouts because then they'll they'll lose out on progress. So don't go into making the perfect plan, but kind of make a plan 90% effective, and then focus more on the width of it. It's like, okay, what happens if this person travels? What happens if this person is extremely low on sleep? What happens if this person comes in with a super tight neck? Those are the things that normally throw off the ideal program path. So I would say have a plan ready for what the what ifs as best as you can. And you can ask the client in terms of like making that tip simple. What are the top 3 things that have blocked you in the past? What are the 3 obstacles that you've dealt with most recently in the past? And people mostly tell you, like, are self-aware enough to know what are the quote-unquote blocks going on.
Well, I think it often drives down to like being very empathetic towards the client, just understanding what is he or she want, and then having some accommodations to make it fun for them. That's really a great piece of advice. I'm going to
100%.
switch. Yes, sorry. Yeah, I'm going to switch gears a little and talk about a little bit on the business element of this industry, given that you also worked as a wellness advisor. What are the things that help some of the business or the clients that you work to scale their business significantly? I understand there could be a lot of confidential parts, but if there are any patterns or any basic things that you found were very obvious, but often people neglected, anything that you could share as a tip or a solution that'd be really helpful.
Interesting. The most obvious things. I had one answer in mind, but then you said, "What's the most obvious?"
I mean, it doesn't have to be obvious. It could be. I did just use obvious because oftentimes the most like the hardest problems are the simplest solutions. So I was coming from that angle. But anything you would like to share about this?
Yeah, I think I can just share from experience. I don't know what I think, especially at the higher level, it's the cases are so much different. And just for context, that's why wellness consulting is, it's part of the multi-trillion-dollar wellness industry, but it's actually shrinking, and it's the slowest growth aspect. And I thought about this because all the other sub-industries within the wellness space are like booming, like huge growth year over year and great in the projections, except for wellness consulting, which is like how you deal with the corporate client. And just a side note on that, I think that's more because corporate clients are really relationships based, and there's gatekeepers you have to get through, and it's going to be really tough to maintain the quality of your program and meet the requirements needed to execute for thousands of people. But I don't have enough context within that, within corporations that have thousands or multiple thousands. We've worked on, let's say, smaller boutique client corporate projects. And in my experience, I would say the most obvious thing is, number one, the owners have to be interfacing with wellness and fitness well. That's the most obvious thing. That's like the red flag, okay? To some extent, it's tough to say, but I'd say that's the most obvious thing. It's like meeting with a doctor who's unfortunately dealing with some health issues and is obese and is giving you body composition advice. Gonna be tough. Gonna be tough to make change, not leading by example. So the most obvious thing is make sure that the leadership, and you hear best practices like make sure things are implemented top down. So I would say make sure that the leadership is fully equipped to deal with their own wellness challenges. And because of the effect that has top down in terms of the culture of the organization or the small team, right? That's super important. And what's interesting is what they find interesting about their own transformation process of reclaiming ownership over their own well-being is most likely going to come about in the initiatives when they create services or products. So it becomes a more authentic, creative process of how they deliver value to their community or to their culture. So I would say the most obvious thing is leadership okay from a well-being perspective? And I just want to add that's hard because in the wellness industry specifically, you have two challenges. You have the standard entrepreneurial challenges, which Elon Musk has said is like eating broken glass. Okay. Shout out to, all those initiatives. But then you also have the well-being challenges of like, okay, how do I solve these really difficult problems in the entrepreneurial space, but also solve these really difficult problems of keeping my well-being going up? And I feel like wellness entrepreneurs specifically have that double responsibility. So that would be I guess the most obvious thing if I look back from my experiences.
Thanks for sharing that. And I just want to talk a little bit about clients. And this is a question that I often hear a lot of coaches complain about or want or always looking for guidance is that how do you retain clients for long term? Because often things you can sell a 1 week plan, a 1 month plan, but that doesn't, if he or she is not going to stick with you for a long run, there's a lot of investment you do, which doesn't compound really well. So what advice would you give for coaches who are looking to retain clients for a longer term?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that me and my partner have always done incredibly well with. And so we think about how do we systematize our insights. My partner is a educator, and I think about strategy, and retention is a super important strategy. Okay, I don't know if 100% retention exists, but we're close to that. And I would say what I think the core reason are some of the things we've already covered. You have to make sure you have a deep empathy process, so deep that maybe that first contact point with the client ends up revealing that they're not ready to work with you this first month. They actually need to go see a therapist for the first month. And then after that second month, then they're ready. That's really difficult because people need income and they see that client as like, man, could help me put food on the table tomorrow. But deep empathy, like having that value and that character is what's going to be attractive. That client's going to remember, wow, this person put my needs over their needs, or created a balance where they understood the long-term value of our relationship. Because if you do that, like that first month, if you put your needs over theirs, then you may get that kind of revenue, but second or third month, they may fall off because they're struggling with, let's say, mental health. Whereas if that first month you gave them a proper recommendation, say, hey, I think based on what you shared, I think you need to kind of think about creating some mental stability first based on what you've shared. And you're putting the power in the client's hand, but you're doing it in a very responsible, scientific, evidence-based way, and you're building this kind of trusted relationship, which again, I think we can only get to trust by being vulnerable and by having deep empathy. If you can get that part down, then the second part would be you have to deliver results. You have to deliver results. This is like Mamba mentality, rest in peace, rest in power to Kobe. But you have to deliver results. Like that's the secrets of retention. Deliver results over and over and over and over and over again. And there's more to say on that, but I would say like those are the two key things: deep empathy, and delivering results. I have more systematic answers to that, but I'll leave it at that. There's a whole.
This is really great. I think definitely everything boils down to that personal thing that you build with your client down. How do you give them what they want? But just curious to know, does this also pay the same for let's say you're coaching some athlete for performance in a race or an event? Does this vary, or do you feel these are going to stick towards any kind of client that you're training?
So could you reframe that question?
I think what I was just trying to understand is, would these strategies still remain the same, irrespective of the kind of client you're training, or would they change? For example, let's say you're training a competitive athlete who is training for an event or a race.
Okay.
Yeah. I just want to understand your perspective on it.
That's why I went back and said, if you remember the earlier part of the interview, which is, the 4 things you have to understand from the advising structure. I mentioned what are your priorities? The priorities is 4 categories: sociocultural, experiential, existential, or elite. So again, part of the deep empathy process is like a system, and everybody should definitely have their own system. And you need to understand that person as fast as possible, even if they're not a competitive environment. It could be a working mom, but if we're talking about let me rephrase that, because I feel like I limited that statement. I would say your deep empathy process should respond as deep as understanding the culture in which that person is operating. There's as much as that person is willing to share, and as much as that person is willing to share as they build more trust with you, should be part of your personalization process. That's a deep empathy. Okay, we're in the industry of changing humans. We're not in the industry of changing a product. So it's a little bit different. And but if the person is elite and their priorities are elite, okay, now you still are going to have to identify how to build teams for that individual, because you may be a great movement specialist. Like in my case, we focus on movement efficiency training. But if the client is playing tennis or cricket, for more cultural context, you cannot pretend that you are a cricket coach. You have to find, if the person has a really low budget, which you would be able to identify in that deep empathy system, then you guys together find the best coach or athletes on YouTube. Shout out to the internet, and identify a good cricket athlete or coach, and think about how to bring some of that into a skill specific environment, right? So if you think about the earlier answer, you still have to identify, am I the right person for this athlete? And if I am, because they trust me on a really deep level, then let's have collective reasoning to identify who else can we bring on to make the competitive probability of this athlete as high as possible. Have that conversation as soon as possible, because guess what? The second step is the same. Result.
Yeah.
All right. It's like, okay, what goes? If you can work backwards as well. You can work backwards. It's like, what is going to increase the probability of results?
Mm-hmm.
Team, for sure. Like you're going to be the first hire. If you're the first hire on this person's team, right? Another goal of the wellness partnership or the wellness advisor is saying, I want to help consumers make better decisions on who they bring on to their wellness team. So for competitive athlete, I think it's still the same deep empathy process. You still have to identify the right team, realize that you're part of the team. You could get fired as well if you don't deliver the second point, which is results.
I think that's a really great way to look at it. I love the way you talked about calculating things going backwards and the probability of delivering good results. I think that's a great way to look at how to deliver really good results to your clients.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Now I think just jumping into the last stage of things on, there's this huge hype of AI. AI is going to transform a lot of things, and there's been a little bit of AI in the fitness industry as well, where I'm sure you might have also seen about those smart mirrors. You just stand and work out, it counts your repetitions. There's so many technologies that came in. A lot of things died down pretty soon. But would love to understand how do you see the AI changing, particularly the wellness industry now or in the next couple of years? If you have any strong insights or thoughts, would love to hear that.
How will it change it? Well, I think it's already changed it. I think it's already changed, just like it's already changed all other industries. This brings me back to the 2013 era when 2010, 2013 era when Instagram was first, social media was first being introduced. And I saw it from the perspective of like, that was my first training job ever. And even that, like, I didn't notice it at that time because I didn't have enough experience to identify cycles or patterns. But at that time, the fitness industry and how people interface with it was being changed real time by people posting videos of their workouts, which kind of hijacks that social proof mechanism we all have in our brain. So I would say I would take the same kind of thinking that there's some changes happening right now, even at the subconscious level of how we make decisions or how we make determine value. So I would say, based on that reasoning, I think AI is changing the fitness space right now because it's going to stimulate how consumers or even the talent thinks about value in terms of how they can deliver value to their clients, how they can deliver value to themselves, and also how they make decisions, obviously business decisions or personal decisions. So that's like just a really brief, quick mental example on like, I think there's changes happening right now. I'm curious, obviously, on a subconscious level, how people are going to be, how behavior is going to change, because that's highly relevant to the business. How I think it'll change in the future, that's a tough one, you know. That's a tough one just because, and I'll explain why it's tough for me, because I don't know what the hardware limitations are in terms of how accessible are the key components of hardware, or let's say, you know, training LLMs, in terms of the costs needed for the bulk of the talent. I think the top 1% of the industry will probably, that's going to be interesting. I say keep your eyes on that. How do the top gyms, because they have a higher budget, how do they think about integrating AI into their services? Because they have to think about millions of members at once. But you know what's interesting is that just like art, it's like the artist, the underdog or the underground artists are always the ones that kind of work on some type of art that ends up defining a certain technique or style. And so I'm curious, you know, how accessible is AI going to be to everyone? And if it is, and like when I say AI, I mean both the hardware side, I mean both the training side, and then I mean the kind of what's it called, the not white label, but it's like, what's the right word for when someone puts their own kind of UX on top of OpenAI's model or
fine-tuning, custom training.
Exactly. So like, the people are people building their own LLMs, or are people using an interface of somebody else's LLM? I think all those things will be interesting to observe real time because it's happening right now. And again, does it create results? Like the results, it's funny, but it's like, okay, if the answer is yes, it is creating results. Coaches are saying, I'm getting more fulfilled clients and better client results because I have AI. Great. Okay, then we go to the next tier of results. It's like there's different types of results. There's like bronze medal, there's silver medal, there's gold medal. If I think AI will help generate results. Now the question is, what type of medal of results, what type of quality of results are we actually talking about? And best case scenario, it hits gold medals. AI is helping people achieve medals. Okay, great. So I think the ceiling of what to expect from a results perspective will increase. And I think that's a net positive for the consumer and the talent side. But maybe you could give me more insight, because this would be helpful for me. What do you think? What do you think the future of AI? Like, two questions. What do you think the future of AI will be in this space specifically? And what do you think the rate of adoption would be?
Yeah, I think definitely these are very deep questions, and even what I strongly believe is AI definitely is going to change this industry in a better way. If in a few friends, often a few strong opinions I have here is that it cannot replace a human coach. Like the relationship has to still exist. There has to be a human coach in the loop. But I strongly feel there can be a lot of tools a client and the coach can have, which are built by AI, which can make life a lot more easier. Just a few examples where I see things changing tremendously are, let's say someone heart rate variability is extremely high, there's super spikes, and it just triggers a notification to a coach saying that, hey, this is something that I've noticed this morning. You should probably ask your client not to work out today, or just go for an easy walk. And even the power of integration with multiple systems. You wear a ring, you have a watch, you wear a Whoop, or even you have a blood pressure monitor that streams data. So all of these connected devices talking to each other, giving patterns and recommendations to a client and also to a coach. I think that is the place where it can truly make things a lot more meaningful to both a coach and a client. And that has to evolve a lot with better AI models, more easier processing on devices and on cloud wherever you run it, keeping it more affordable also, because I think fine tuning the LLM is expensive unless you use any of those open source models. And as we are seeing, the open source models are also picking up to the efficiency of the closed source models like Beat GPT-4, etc. So as things get more accessible, I see a huge positive impact in this trend, but don't see a lot of value add by, let's say I'm going to replace a coach. You can just train with an AI to meet your goal. Maybe it might work for a certain segment of the population, but not something universal or not something that would change the world in any way, what I feel.
Yeah. That's super interesting. I mean, I'll go back to that. Because I'm, again, super curious about this. Human relationships are going to be constantly dynamic. Why? Because the world is constantly changing. So I don't think you can ever replace that type of human relationship, because it's almost like two people of the same biological background, right? Right. One is not a machine. The other one is a machine. So there's two people thinking about how to respond to the world together. And I think that's going to be impossible to replace.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to cause any harm, but I think it's like that is special in its own way. And then what you said is interesting, because it reminded me that technically these biometric wearables already have some form of quote unquote AI in terms of recommendation system. Hey, you got terrible sleep, get more sleep tomorrow. Yeah. So that's interesting, right? Because it kind of goes back to that second question, which is what have you learned about adoption, right? What have you learned about adoption? Specifically of the software, but also of like the recommendations. Because let's say AI makes a perfect recommendation system, but now we have to talk about the adoption of the behavior or the habit, right? What have you, any insights that you've like gleaned so far? What are your thoughts on that?
I think I still think the AI should not give direct response recommendations to the clients, because I mean it's still evolving. We don't know how accurate these could be. I mean, some could be fairly accurate, some probably not. I think that is where adopting this is a lot in the hands of the practitioners or the people at the forefront of this industry, right? Be it fitness coaches, wellness instructors, someone teaching something, advisors. I think having these recommendations in the hands of such people and then toning it down to what's actually needed to a client or a user, I think that is where adoption can truly increase. Because even for an average customer, I don't think many people would understand what VO2 max is or what HRV is or these things. Even if you show sleep, I'm sure people get a hang of it. Okay, I'm sleeping less, I need to sleep more. But that's obviously only one side of one metric to look at. There are probably a bunch of more on how are you recovering, how much are you consuming, how are you sleeping, and all of these. I feel it's probably not best to give direct recommendations to a client. Some sort of having a coach in the loop to tone it down and make someone understand. And I feel that is going to drive adoption a lot. But yeah, we're only going to wait and watch on how this entire ecosystem can be created with coaches and all the wellness people in the loop on communicating with the end customer.
a great perspective.
Thank you.
True.
Yeah, I think these are the, sorry, I've been asking you a lot of questions. These are things where we just wanted to get your thoughts on. Thank you for taking your time, being very patient and sharing all the insights you have. Any closing thoughts you have for most of our audience are fitness coaches, so anything you would like to share with them, any closing recommendations you have, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously my mission is to bring the best out in others. And I would say the message I would want to share is like to try to think about developing your own value system, because the true competition, the true opponent we have is lifestyle disease. And that exists in every culture, subculture, main pop culture, every level of culture. It's going to come with a different set of problems. So whether you're in a gym with 5 other trainers and it's like Shark Tank, it's really competitive. Whether you are wherever you are, like wherever you find yourself, developing your own talent, I would say really get comfortable with what your creative superpowers are and encourage others to find theirs, so that you can have multiple people working on this larger problem of chronic lifestyle disease. Fundamentally, human potential, I feel, hasn't really been discovered yet. I feel like there's still a lot left to uncover, and I feel like that is something everybody can work towards. And to spend time on competing and building skills towards that scoreboard versus who has the most clients, who's doing the most sessions. Those things are important, sure, but are they moving the needle that's going to leave a better tomorrow for your kids or your community or your culture, right? Are you thinking about leveling up the culture, leveling up the community, leveling up your generation? Try to keep that broader game, that much harder, difficult game in mind, and celebrate the small wins along the way.
Great. Thank you so much, Nicholas. This was really a fun conversation. Learned a lot, and thank you for being very candid and sharing all the things you've learned. Really appreciate you for your time and the thoughts.
Likewise, thank you for having me on.
Thank you.